In this vlog, I will be discussing the first stage of the design process, framing and problematizing. I will define framing, detail our theoretical choices, and analyze how these impacted on our problematizing. According to Schoen, frames come about when a certain perception of a problematic situation, a view, is combined with the adoption of a terminology and a way of reasoning that allows the framer to develop a set of possible actions. Patton and Dorst argue that frames are also value-laden. They write how each person's frame not only consists of a way of seeing or representing a situation, but is also suggestive of ways to move or interpret relative to this. They evoke particular outcome spaces. As frames delimit outcomes and design choices, the 5 unique frames we all brought to the process were sure to send us down different paths. Not only were they not shared with each other, I don't think we were fully conscious of our own frames. Hay proposes a framing cycle, a dynamic process through which design frames are socially negotiated and shared, wherein individual frames are made explicit and common frames can be negotiated. So how did our frames evolve? After a literature review, we made a first attempt at making our frames explicit and shared. We agreed on the brief of designing something to support our users' communication with technology. We agreed on using the social model of disability to inform our design process by focusing on removing technological barriers rather than fixing our users. We also agreed to use user-centered design through interviews with users, proxies, and experts. The benefits of user-centered design were that we were able to tackle the design brief without having direct access to our user group, and keep the user and their needs in the forefront of our minds throughout the process. The downside of using user-centered design instead of participatory design is that we had to continually make choices for our users instead of with them, thus contributing to their disempowerment and also potentially creating a less successful final design. Although we had reached consensus on our theoretical underpinnings, many aspects of our frames remained implicit. During the stages that followed, these hidden values would be made explicit through conflict. Analyzing the data that we pulled from the user and proxy interviews and making design decisions based on that data repeatedly resulted in conflict. For example, after coding and analyzing the interviews with the users, a few patterns emerged. The biggest category of barrier by far was text messaging, with 10 out of 21 users reporting this as a difficulty, while 3 reported it as a strength. But then in the interview with Pete, our proxy and expert, a significant amount of time was spent discussing issues of how gatekeepers and human support can negatively impact on the users. Referring back to the user data, out of 21 users, 5 reported their human support was helpful and 3 reported that their human support, or lack thereof, was a barrier. When it came time to decide which barrier we should focus on removing, there was conflict regarding the relative value of the somewhat shallow users' interview data versus the in-depth interview with Pete. Ultimately, we decided to go with the data from the user's interview based on our desire to respect their voice and be user-centered. But in our preliminary work, we had never even considered how we might handle the conflict between the user data and the proxy data.